Welcome to our introductory video on the permit office. This is just a brief introduction and history. It's going to be very specific to South Carolina because that's my home state, but this is also available for everyone to review. There's great information within this video, and I hope you enjoy it. This presentation is based upon the knowledge and opinions of the presenter, myself, Michael Doles, and is not to be considered as legal counsel or any other guidance as far as what you may need to confirm with your local government, your supervisors, your state and national agencies, or your groups. It's not intended to be used as legal advice, nor is it going to be exhaustive in nature. The questions on legal administration and enforcement of code should always be brought before your administrator and your legal counsel. This presentation is designed specific to those issues related to the South Carolina Permitting Office. Issues to be discussed will be including the historical events leading to the state code system, the registration certification requirements for the Building Codes Office, state licensing requirements specific to the Building Code Department, review of applications in the permit process, issues to be considered when revoking a permit, South Carolina specific applications, and the ICC exam process. The goal of this presentation is designed to familiarize and assist code officials, permitting staff, and administrative professionals with the statutes and regulations specific to the Building Code Permit Office in South Carolina. The objectives of this program are that upon completion of this presentation, participants will better be able to recognize the importance of the permitting office in the built environment, to recognize common regulatory provisions that apply to the codes office, and the application of sound permitting principles. A brief course overview. This program will include the historical significance and what led up to the South Carolina Building Codes program as we know it today. Some of the legislative provisions that apply in South Carolina. The roles of the many professionals in the Department of Building Safety. The application processes, permitting, and regulatory provisions. So let's just do a quick quiz here, which is not a stated goal of this presentation. Module 2, Historical Review of the Building Code. Building codes are not a product of modern civilization, but have evolved from the past. However, the purpose of the codes has remained clear. The Building Code of Hammurabi, king of the Babylonian Empire, is the earliest known code of law, written in 2200 BC. In this code, exact requirements for construction are not given. Rather, the code assesses penalties if the building is not properly constructed. Translated texts from the Code of Hammurabi include the following. If a builder builds a house for a man and does not make its construction firm, and the house which he has built collapses and causes the death of the owner of the house, the builder shall be put to death. If it causes the death of the son of the owner of the house, the son of that builder shall be put to death. If it destroys property, he shall restore whatever is destroyed, and because he did not make the house which he built firm and it collapsed, he shall rebuild the house which collapsed at his own expense. Historically, building code development occurred in response to tragedy rather than prevention. Some milestones in the history of the codes include the following. During the Greek and the Roman times, laws were enacted to restrict construction types, roofing materials, size of buildings, density of land use, and lot coverage. Similar regulations were enacted in the Middle Ages, especially in England. In 1630, building regulation records show that Plymouth, Massachusetts, required thatched roofs be changed to wood. During Revolutionary times, George Washington recommended that height and area limitations be restricted for wood frame buildings when planning the District of Columbia. In the latter part of the 19th century, the United States enacted its first set of building regulations because of widespread loss of property by fire. London was almost two-thirds destroyed in the Great Fire of 1666. Some historians have stated that the destruction was more of a blessing than a calamity, for at the time London was a crowded, filthy city of low timber-framed warehouses, churches, and houses. The fire is reported to have started in a run-down neighborhood near the Tower of London. By the time its advance was halted, the fire had raged for 5 days and nights. It destroyed 15,000 buildings, including 84 churches. Only 6 lives were lost in accidents directly attributed to the fire. The most devastating and costly fire in American history was the fire that almost destroyed Chicago in 1871. The Chicago fire devastated not only a major portion of the city, but the financial reserves of many insurance companies, 60 of which went into bankruptcy. Those that survived financially threatened to leave the city en masse unless adequate laws regulating buildings were enacted. It took a little more time for the city fathers to overcome resistance to new controls, but in 1875 a building code and a fire prevention ordinance became effective. While it is always interesting to see on the national and worldwide level how we got to the code development processes we have today, let's bring this home to South Carolina. How did we get to where we are today? Several events occurred leading up to one specific event that occurred down off the coast only a few years ago. September 1989, over 30 years ago, South Carolina was devastated by Hurricane Hugo. Hugo's impact altered the state's landscape and mindset about disasters. This was the first natural disaster in the U.S. with more than $1 billion in insured property losses. In 1989 dollars, the South Carolina losses alone were more than $4 billion. The South Carolina Energy Management Division estimated that a storm of similar intensity on the same path as Hugo would cause more than $16.6 billion in damages and destroy more than 21,000 homes statewide today. Hugo made landfall northeast of Charleston as a Category 4 hurricane with wind gusts up to 135 miles per hour and a storm surge estimated at 20 feet. The powerful cyclone moved inland and north, wreaking havoc in places like Charlotte, North Carolina, West Virginia, and even Pennsylvania. But no place was hit harder than South Carolina. In the aftermath of Hugo, the South Carolina Department of Insurance, along with the insurance carriers in the state, came together to assist residents in recovery, repairing, and the rebuilding process. This was a difficult time that tested the fortitude of South Carolina. Rather than let this horrific storm and the massive damage left in its wake defeat them, South Carolinians responded by working to improve the way we prepare for natural disasters. South Carolina is now recognized as a strong leader in building codes, enacting a statewide code in 1998 requiring enforcement by counties and municipalities. In 2012, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety issued a report rating the building code systems in the 18 most hurricane-prone states along the Gulf and Atlantic coast, including South Carolina. States were evaluated based on the specific provisions in their code, as well as enforcement, certification, and training of code officials, and licensing of contractors. Using 47 individual data points, each state was assigned a numeric score on a 100-point scale. South Carolina received a score of 84, placing it in the top 5 of the 18 states evaluated. The process by which the state of South Carolina was able to enact a statewide code is a process known as enabling legislation. The creation and enactment of a building code by a local governmental entity is an important legal step requiring caution and advice of an attorney. While the selection or development of a building code is usually the task of building officials, the responsibility for getting it legally operative must rest with the municipal attorney. As it has been previously discussed, there must be some authority for the enactment of the building code at the state level. This is particularly true if the municipality does not have home rule, or if the state does not recognize the power as one of the inherent powers of the municipality. The municipal attorney should be requested to ensure there is ample authority for the adoption of such a code by the local government before proceeding. If there is no such authority, it should be garnered from the state before the code is adopted. The provisions of the enabling legislation must be followed precisely. Most states that have an express provision allowing the adoption of building codes, and even those states that do not, have legislation which permits the adoption of various codes by reference. In order to obtain the benefits of adoption by reference, instead of publishing the entire code, great care must be taken to follow exactly the procedural steps established in the state statute. A notice of intent must frequently be published in a newspaper of general circulation in the municipality. This is to inform the public of the pendency of an adoption of the building code. Codes are adopted by the state legislature in the state of South Carolina after review by the South Carolina Building Code Council. This is directed in the adopting enabling legislation of the state. Currently, the mandatory codes referenced in South Carolina law that have been modified and adopted by the South Carolina Building Code Council must be enforced by every South Carolina municipality and county. Appendices to the mandatory codes may not be used by municipalities and counties unless the appendices are specifically adopted as a local modification to the Building Code Council. The latest edition of the permissive codes referenced in South Carolina Code 6960 may be adopted by municipalities and counties via ordinance. Adoption of the mandatory codes and permissive codes does not include the chapters, sections, or provisions addressing administrative policies or procedures. Administrative policies and procedures are the sole responsibility of each local jurisdiction. If the governing body of a local jurisdiction desires to use the administrative provisions in one or more of the adopted codes, it must first adopt the chapters or sections by ordinance. In lieu of adopting the administrative provisions contained in the adopted codes, the governing body of a local jurisdiction may develop a specific administrative policies and procedure for the operation of its building inspection department. If administrative policies and procedures are developed at the local level, they must be adopted by ordinance before they can take effect. Within the agency of the South Carolina Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation, the state legislature established the South Carolina Building Code Council. The primary function of the Building Code Council is to adopt or modify model codes for South Carolina and regulate the registration of building code officers, special inspectors, and the modular building program. To review a few of the key provisions of the South Carolina code adoption process. Number 1, they must be reviewed by the South Carolina Building Code Council. Adoption notices are required to be posted. Amendments are allowed. There are specific criteria for the amendments, and they must also be reviewed by the South Carolina Building Code Council. One other note is the ICC typically publishes the code in a 3-year cycle. Current South Carolina amendments can be viewed on the Building Code Council's webpage, or you may obtain a copy of the ICC International Residential Code or Building Code series, which will include the amendments in their specific editions. So when I started, we had the Southern Building Code Congress International, the standard building code. The 1994 is the edition that I first started with as an inspector. We went on to the International Building Code. The first edition seen was the 2000 edition. Prior to 2000, we had the SBCCI. In January of 2003, ICBO, BOCA, and SBCCI ceased to exist. In 1915, the Building Officials and Code Administrators was established to provide a forum for the exchange of knowledge and ideals concerning building safety and construction regulations. In 1927, the Uniform Building Code was adopted by the Pacific Coast Building Officials Conference, which later became the International Conference of Building Officials, ICBO. In 1945, the Standard Building Code was published by the Southern Building Code Congress International. In 1950, the Basic Building Code was published by BOCA. In 1994, the three legacy model code groups, BOCA, ICBO, and SBCCI, began efforts for establishing the International Code Council and merging the regional codes into a single set of international codes. The International Building Code was published by the ICC in 2000, and in 2003 the consolidation into one model code organization, the ICC, was finalized. The advent of model building codes has made possible the control of construction in many communities that had previously found it physically impossible or financially impractical to produce codes of their own. Such codes also make it possible for communities using archaic codes to replace them with well-written and consistently maintained model codes. In the state of South Carolina, the adopted codes currently in effect are the 2018 editions of the International Building Code, Residential Code, Mechanical Code, Plumbing Code, Fire Code, International Fuel Gas Code, the 2017 edition of the National Electric Code, NFPA 70, and the 2009 International Energy Conservation Code. South Carolina Code 6960 allows municipalities and counties to adopt the latest editions of the following nationally recognized codes. These permissive codes must first be adopted by ordinance before enforcement can begin. The permissive codes that are approved through the Building Code Council and the state legislature for adoption by local jurisdictions include the International Property Maintenance Code, the International Existing Building Code, the International Performance Code, and the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. Note that while the International Existing Building Code is a permissive code in South Carolina, this code was adopted by reference in the International Building Code Chapter 34, which is a mandatory code. In 2012, the Council moved this International Building Code reference to the International Existing Building Code of Chapter 1 Administration, Section 101.4.7 of the South Carolina Building Code. As such, the South Carolina Existing Code is a permissive code. Currently, the South Carolina Building Code Council has reviewed and adopted and recommended, and the state legislature has followed suit for the adoption of the 2021 South Carolina Building Codes at their meeting on October 6, 2021. The Council approved as an effective date January 1, 2023. After our model code has been thoroughly reviewed by the Building Code Council and all amendments, a notice must be published prior to any final adoption after action by the state legislature. The Building Code Council is authorized, again, to review, adopt, modify, and promulgate the building codes that are referenced in state statutes. But a notice of intention to adopt a new edition of a code, or modify an existing code must be published in the state register as a notice of general interest on websites published by the Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation, and also notice must be provided to each local building department with instructions for its prominent display. You will be receiving such notices soon concerning the next adoption process. After final review by the Building Code Council and approval, final action by the South Carolina legislature, the code is finally ready to be presented. Within this code, there may be amendments. If you have a publication which includes the amendments, that's great. Quite often, the amendments have to be a standalone separate document that must be referenced with the code book. You also have appendices that may or may not be adopted. They must be adopted specifically as needed. And remember what we talked about in Chapter 1 for the administrative chapters of the Building Code Council. And finally, there are reference standards. The International Code Council typically issues new editions of the codes in 3-year cycles. After each new code edition is issued by the ICC, the South Carolina Building Code Council begins the process of adopting and/or modifying the codes. The modification procedure is established according to South Carolina Code of Regulations 8-240. Modifications to building codes may be submitted to the Council by local jurisdictions or professional associations. Council may grant modifications on a local or statewide basis. Proposed local modifications of building codes shall not take effect in any local jurisdiction until after they have first been reviewed and approved by the Council. Requests for local modifications may be considered by Council or may be referred by Council to a study committee established by the Building Code Council for review and recommendation. All statewide modifications made to any of the building codes for the building code cycle must be approved by Council prior to the established implementation date. All such modifications shall be mandatory for all jurisdictions in the state and shall be in effect for as long as the specific edition of the code is in effect. The appendices in the model codes offer optional or supplemental criteria to the provisions in the main chapters of the code. Appendices provide additional information for administration of the building department, as well as standards not typically administered by all building departments. Appendices have the same force and effect as the other chapters of the model codes, but they must be specifically adopted at the adoption process. There are over 530 reference standards published by 38 organizations in the International Building Code. A standard is a published technical document that represents an industry consensus on how a material or assembly is designed, manufactured, tested, or installed, so that a specific level of performance is obtained. Standards are primarily developed by industry organizations and professional associations incorporating the views of the interested parties. A standard is developed in response to an identified need and typically contains information that is based on many years of testing and research. A standard is not intended to be used as primary law, but as a secondary authoritative reference. While a model code becomes law when it is adopted by a jurisdiction, a standard only becomes law to the extent to which it is referenced in the model code. Standards address construction materials, design and engineering requirements, installation methods, or testing practices. As listed in Chapter 1 of the International Building Code, where conflicts occur between provisions of the code and reference codes and standards, the provisions of the code shall apply. The South Carolina Energy Standard has been updated to the 2009 International Energy Conservation Code for all commercial and residential buildings. You can direct the public, or for yourself, you can view free copies of the codes at iccsafe.org/codes/South-Carolina. Thank you so much for your attention throughout this program. I ask that you continue to look at our other videos and do the training there also. And we'd ask also for your help. Please subscribe and like this webpage and share it with others. And reach out to me if you have any questions. My email is listed on this page. You have a blessed day.